welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another video for you talking today about 5 Star Wars canon books that I recommend for people who want to get into those books. I also am intending in the future, probably sometime in June, doing a video recommending also some books that I recommend that you check out if you want to get into Legends, but for this video I'm going to be sticking strictly to the current canon books. And of course, there are several other books that I think make for good starters, but I decided to pick 5 that I particularly would recommend. I have 3 standalones, 1 trilogy, and 1 series on this list. Before I get into it, I do also just want to mention I haven't read a huge amount of the canon books. I've read much more of the Legends books than the canon books. And so I'm sure that with time, as I've read more of the canon books, I may update this list later on once I've read more and have a wider pool of books to pick from. But right now, as of the books that I have read up to this point, these are the ones that I would point to if you are looking to get into the canon books. The first one that I have to talk about is, I don't really have these in any order of the one that I would recommend the most, but I would say this is one of the ones that I would recommend the most out of all of these, which is Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. This is a great book to start with for several reasons. First of all, if you are a fan of the prequel era, especially The Phantom Menace, I think this is a great one to start with. It follows Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon prior to The Phantom Menace as a master and apprentice duo, obviously, and doing a mission together. And so I think if you're a fan of the prequel era, and especially Episode 1, especially if you are a fan of Qui-Gon Jinn, because this book does a great job with Qui-Gon, as well as Obi-Wan also, but really a great job with Qui-Gon, I think you'll enjoy this one. It's also a good one if you're looking for something with a Jedi focus, because, this book is heavily Jedi focused, obviously, because you have Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, as well as some other characters who are Jedi in this book. So if you want something following the Jedi, this is a good one to start with also. And also, if you want something that is very character focused, I think this is a good one to go with. I think the character work in this book is excellent. The characterization of both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon is some of the best that I've read in the canon, especially Qui-Gon. I always liked Qui-Gon, but I never quite loved him like a lot of other people did, but this book really made me fall in love with Qui-Gon. So I think if you're looking for some really strong character writing as well, this is a great one to start with. And another advantage to this book, as well as the other next 2 that I'm going to talk about, is that it is fully standalone. You don't have to have read anything else in order to understand it. The case with some other Star Wars books, both in canon and Legends, is sometimes they tend to tie into one another a lot, and so sometimes it's an advantage to have read other books first. This one is totally standalone, as are the other 3 standalones that I have to mention. They're all books that you can read without having read anything else. The next one that I have to talk about is actually kind of the inverse of Master and Apprentice in some ways, which is Lords of the Sith by Paul S. Kemp. This is basically like Master and Apprentice, except for the dark side. This follows heavily Vader and Palpatine during the Imperial era as they journey to Ryloth to crush the Ryloth rebellion that is going on there. And this is a really great one, kind of like Master and Apprentice, if you are interested in dark side stories, especially again if you're a fan of the original trilogy characters like Vader and Palpatine. And also, if you're a fan of Rebels, this is probably a good one. I personally have not seen Rebels yet, which I would like to do someday, but I have not done so yet. But this book does deal heavily with Ryloth and with Cham Syndulla, who is the father of Hera Syndulla from Rebels. And so if you are a fan of Rebels, this might be a good one to check out as well for that connection. And it's just a really great standalone as well. Don't need anything else to go with it. But it's a very good story also in terms of characters and also I think plot. To me, Master and Apprentice was not as memorable when it comes to the plotting, but this book I think has excellent plot and excellent characters. And is also a really good look at, the Empire, because you have some other Imperial characters, you have kind of the Ryloth freedom fighters, you have Vader and Palpatine, a lot of good character stuff in here, a lot of good plot stuff, just a very fun and exciting book to read, and one that I would definitely recommend for getting into the canon. The final single book that I have to talk about is another Claudia Gray book, and that is going to be Lost Stars. This is, again, I think a great one if you're a fan of the original trilogy era more broadly. Wars of the Sith I think is good for like original trilogy specifically, or if you really like Vader and Palpatine. This one is really good if you're a fan of the original trilogy in general. It does expand beyond the original trilogy. It goes even into some events past Return of the Jedi, but this is just an amazing book that has a very interesting premise of two characters who are childhood friends who become lovers and end up on opposing sides of the Galactic Civil War. So one of them is on the Rebels, one of them is in the Empire. And it goes through the entire original trilogy, many of the big events and battles of that trilogy, as well as a few others here and there. And this is a great one also for the character focus. I think this is a really great work with the characters, especially getting that whole, these two characters who are romantically involved, but then end up on opposite sides of the war is just a very interesting concept, I think. And they're very compelling characters as well. And this is a really good one to check out if you just want something that is very much tied to the movies also, and kind of giving a unique perspective on those events. Because with the movies, with the big battles, the space battles and things, these are two pilot characters, so it's predominantly the space battles. In those you follow, the heroes of the story, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and all of them. Whereas with this, you get the perspective of just the regular pilots, the regular soldiers, which is really cool. And great look at the Empire as well as they go through the Imperial Academy for a portion of the book. And just an all-around great book to start with. This is one of the first canon books that I read. I think it was the first of the standalones that I read, and I had a blast with it. And I think it's a great one to start with in the canon. Next, we have the trilogy that I have to talk about, which is going to be the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, the canon Thrawn trilogy. There's 3 different Thrawn trilogies across all of Star Wars. This is the first canon trilogy consisting of Thrawn, Thrawn Alliances, and Thrawn Treason. This one, I think, out of these is the one that I would recommend the least, but I think it does have a few specific instances where I think it's a great place to start. First of all, if you're a big fan of Thrawn in canon, especially with things like Rebels or Ahsoka that he's appeared in, if you're a big fan of him in those projects, I think you will really enjoy him here. Because, this is kind of his backstory in some ways, especially the first book is very much his backstory of how he got involved in the Empire. And then, so it's great if you're a fan of Thrawn. I think it's also good if you're a fan of Thrawn in the Legends books as well. This trilogy, I think, does a great job with his character because you really get a lot about Thrawn himself as a person, which, in my opinion, you don't get as much of that in the Legends books. In Legends, he is, to me, much more of just the villain that you don't really get to know that much. He's just very, very competent and just very enjoyable to see on the page. Whereas in this book, you really get into his head, you really get more of like who he is as a character. And so I think if you are interested in something like that, if you're coming from Legends, I think this is a great one to start with also. And the thing that I like about this trilogy, one of them, in addition to it being great in its own right, is how, different each of the books are. The first book is very much Thrawn's backstory of him becoming a part of the Empire and rising through the ranks. The second book is very unique, and it's actually my favorite of the trilogy, which is not a very popular opinion. Most people consider the first book their favorite, and the second book the least favorite. But I really like Alliances, which is Thrawn going on a mission with Darth Vader, and it's split between a mission that he goes with Darth Vader on, and then in the past he also met Anakin Skywalker on the same planet. So you have this kind of dual plotting that's going on, which is really cool. And then the third book is about some stuff that he's doing in the midst of the Rebels TV show. So each one is very different and has something unique to offer, which I really like. And it's also a trilogy, so if you want something more than just a single standalone, you can get 3 books instead of just 1. I do think that the first book could be read as a standalone, for sure. But I think that, each book in this trilogy offers something interesting and unique, so I would highly recommend reading all 3. My final recommendation that I'm saving for last, because this is the big series that I have to talk about, which is the reason why I'm saving it for last, because I think if you're looking to get into the canon, something like standalones or even a trilogy is much more accessible than a big series. But I want to heavily recommend this one for starting as well, which is the High Republic series by various different authors. This is the first Canon book that I read, or the first part of the Canon books that I got into with Light of the Jedi, which is where I would suggest starting because it's the first book that came out. It's not the first book chronologically. High Republic is split into 3 phases, and phase 2 is a prequel, so that is first chronologically. But I personally would recommend starting with Light of the Jedi because that's kind of where you're meant to start based on the way it was published. And this is a great series for a whole lot of reasons. I will say it is very, big and wide in scope, so it might come across a little intimidating for that reason, and there's so many different storylines going on. There's adult novels, which are kind of the main novels, there's the young adult novels, there's middle grade novels, there's comic books, there's manga, there's all kinds of stuff going on with this. I personally have only read the adult and young adult books, so that's what I'm really into. But for that reason, for all those different mediums, it can be a bit overwhelming if this is what you're starting with. So I would be wary of that if you're getting into it. However, I do think if you just want to stick with the main adult novels, those do tell a good story just by themselves, and then the other stuff is also cool too. But I would recommend this, especially if you're a fan of larger series. Obviously, this is a big, expansive series. So if you're looking for something big and ambitious, this is a great one to look into. This is a great one if you want something very different and unique, because this is taking place during a wholly unique era that had never been seen in Star Wars before. Even back in the Legends books, this was a part of Star Wars that had never been explored. Heavily focused on the Jedi, which is really cool, the kind of the Jedi in their prime. Which is very, very cool. Really unique villains, and I think this also, for me at least, is the one that I would most recommend for people who love the old Legends stories. If you love like the big interconnected storylines of things like the Bantam era or the New Jedi Order or things like that, I think this is the perfect place to start, because to me the High Republic is the closest to those old stories that we have gotten from the current canon, at least in terms of the books. And so I would highly recommend this if you are a fan of those old stories and you're looking to get into the current canon as well. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons I'd recommend the High Republic to start. Definitely, if you are put off by how big it is, maybe start with a standalone or a trilogy. But if you are interested in this era, if you are fine with something this big, then definitely go for it. And so those are all of my recommendations, my 5 recommendations. In addition to that, I also have a Twitter account, which is at RBN1207 that you can follow if you'd like. I do have an account also for Caleb Likes Books, but I have this specific account mainly for Star Wars stuff, where I interact with the Star Wars fandom and things like that. And I asked my followers if they had any recommendations in particular, and a few people did reach out and leave their recommendations, which I will share with you now. So first we have Alex, who echoed some of my own recommendations. He said Master and Apprentice, Thrawn, and Lords of the Sith, which obviously I included in my list, so I would definitely second all of those recommendations. Garrick suggested Lost Stars and Aftermath, which I haven't read Aftermath personally, but I have read Lost Stars, and again, obviously it's on my list, so I highly recommend that one. And Aftermath, from what I've heard, sounds like also a solid starting point. And finally, we have Jeremy, who recommends Alphabet Squadron, Bloodline, A New Dawn, The Living Force, and Brotherhood. Funnily enough, the only one out of those that I have read is Bloodline, and I think that is also a great place to start. It's just not one that I included in my list. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of my recommendations, which of these sound the most interesting to you. And if you are watching this video and already have read some of the canon books and we're just looking for some extra recommendations or whatever, let me know what you think of my picks and what you would recommend for getting into the canon books. As I said, I plan to do another one of these videos for Legends later on, so be looking forward to that. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.